Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, and I am coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today I have a very special episode for you today, as I will be taking a look at the 1980 debut album by Irish juggernaut U2. Now, as you may have seen on my Crosby, Stills and Nash video last week, I recently had an opportunity to take a trip back to my native Northern California, which is a pilgrimage I make an attempt to do at least 2 or 3 times a year. For me, one of the highlights was and always is an opportunity to see, catch up, and hang out with my best friend from high school. His name is Tim. He lives out in Sacramento. And I have to tell you, sometimes I have sympathy for the people. When Tim and I get together, I have sympathy for the people who are around us. Tim and I have a tendency to revert back to our very immature adolescent high school selves, where we can't stop giggling and laughing and reminiscing about all of the days back in our nerdy adolescence. And this trip wasn't much different than that. I know when Tim and I get together, at least for me, everything else around me sort of just dissipates, and he and I just become the most entertaining thing in the world, at least to each other. Other people may find it annoying, and I'm sure we've alienated a few people in our day, but it doesn't really matter. It was a great visit. I had an awesome time. I always love seeing my brother from another mother. Now, where U2 may come into this story is that my friend Tim is arguably one of the biggest U2 fanatics in the world. He's certainly the biggest U2 fan I've ever met, and his love affair with this band has gone on for well over 30 years. This is a band that I am a casual fan of. It took me a long time to get to that point. I'll kind of explain as I go along. But I did want to dedicate this episode to my best friend Tim out in California. I love you, brother. It was awesome seeing you last week. Can't wait to do it again. Man, it was such a fun, great visit. Like I said, he and I we get in this zone. And sometimes I feel like it's almost better if there's nobody else around us, because I could see us getting very irritating to other people. To me, I find it infinitely entertaining. I'm sorry about that. But he and I had a great opportunity to spend a whole day together, and it was just absolutely amazing. Tim and I met in 7th grade. We grew up in a small mountain town in Northern California called Paradise, California, a town that you may have heard of over the past several years. It was a town that fell victim to one of the wildfires in Northern California. The Camp Fire, up until recently with the situation that's gone on out in Hawaii. The fire that wiped out our hometown of Paradise was actually one of the deadliest fires on record. It's not a competition, but I wasn't living there at the time. But that's where Tim and I met in 7th grade. We grew up in that town, and almost immediately he and I just became like hetero soulmates. There had never been a friend that I'd ever had before that I ever really related to. There was never really a friend like that ever made me laugh the way that he did. And like I said, almost immediately, he and I met in 7th grade history class. I still remember that. And the first thing that attracted me to my friend Tim was, and I can't do it, but he could do this weird double jointed thing with his thumb. And for some reason, I just thought that was the funniest thing I had ever seen. And I had friends growing up before I met my friend Tim, but none of them I really ever truly felt connected to. A couple of the friends I had growing up were friends because our parents were friends before he and I were friends. So I felt like Tim was really the first friend I made on my own, and without the help of my parents. I was a very nerdy, introverted type of kid, especially once I got into middle school. But when Tim and I met, there was just a connection. And not to say that it hasn't been smooth sailing for the entire almost over 30 years of our friendship. but he and I have a relationship and a friendship that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world, especially in the current state it's in right now. Tim and I basically became instantly inseparable. We spent pretty much all of middle school and high school together. And really, and I don't say this lightly because I don't believe in being hyper dramatic, but there were times, especially in high school, he and I went through a lot. Both he and I went through a lot of different sort of traumas growing up in high school. He and I were both really outcasted in our high school. He and I were both kind of throwaway kids within our peer group. I don't know that I would necessarily say that I guess we were nerds, but at least on the plus side is that he and I were never really victimized. We were kind of left alone. Sometimes I felt like the kids in our high school were kind of scared of us for some reason or intimidated by us, didn't quite know what to make of us. And as, he and I both went through a lot of sort of traumatic events in high school. There were times when, I'm not exaggerating when I say this, that knowing that I had him as my friend and him that I could go and at least hang out with Monday through Friday during the school hours, and he and I spent most of our weekends together anyway. But he really saved my life in a lot of ways, and I'm eternally in eternal debt to him for putting up with myself all of these years. As I think I may have mentioned on the my Morrissey sort of fan origin video, right around halfway through 12th grade, for some reason he and I had a falling out. And I don't even really remember what it was necessarily about, but suddenly he and I had sort of split about halfway through 12th grade. And I remember that for me was an incredibly lonely time, probably the loneliest of my entire life. And again, I don't quite know what spawned it. I think part of it was the fact that he and I, we've always been very silly and goofy. He and I have always kind of had our own language. In high school, he and I were both very obsessed with comic books and music, and he and I never really talked about anything real, despite the fact that he and I were both going through some things that were very real. And I almost wonder, looking back on it at a certain point, if he and I had just sort of become bored of each other. There had been some tension you could feel sort of bubbling up under the surface. And as he and I hung out a couple weeks ago, I even told him, because sometimes we'll bring up our sort of falling out in 12th grade. I even told him, I was like, man, I just felt like you were like getting bored of me. And when the thing actually happened, the day that he and I sort of went separate directions, I remember not even being overly surprised about it. I remember I went home and I was very upset, but I told my parents, I told my dad that what had happened. And he's like, well, you were kind of expecting this anyway, weren't you? Which I sort of had been. But I do think that he and I went through both of us went through a lot of trauma in high school. And he and I had more of a real relationship at that time. And again, he and I, the strongest comparison I can make, even though this comparison is not entirely accurate because we weren't total dirt merchants, but I think one of the closest comparisons I can make to he and I growing up is that we were sort of like Beavis and Butthead. We had our own language. We were sort of outcasted by everybody else. It was just he and I against the world. And I remember when he and I sort of split up our friendship towards the end of 12th grade, I remember at the time, and I wasn't, up until maybe a few years ago, I never admitted how much it hurt me, how alone I felt after that. And I think for many years after that, it sort of affected our friendship. He and I made several attempts over the years to sort of reconcile and become friends again. But again, we got to a point where we never ever talked about what had happened. And I felt like that had always sort of driven a wedge between us. And over the years, there have been times where we've been relatively close, and there's also been times that we've completely been non-speaking. He and I, when we were in college, we made an attempt to be roommates. That didn't work out very well, although that wasn't entirely our fault. We had a roommate who was a cousin of mine who was basically Satan incarnate, who basically destroyed that entire house. But anyway, a couple years ago, or maybe about a year and a half ago, I reached out to Tim. He and I were sort of going through a phase where we weren't speaking based on some other stupidity that was probably avoidable on both of our parts. We reached out in about a year ago or so. He and I hung out for the first time in probably almost a decade. And it was absolutely amazing. We sat down and we really had, for the first time in our entire lives, despite the fact that we're now both almost 50 years old and we met when we were 12, for the first time ever, I felt like we had a real conversation. And weirdly enough, for the first time, I felt like I was actually starting to get to know more about who he really was as a person. Not just what Marvel super heroines he wanted to hose or what U2 songs were his favorites, but we actually started talking about real things. And I'm very proud and happy of the fact right now that our friendship is in absolutely pristine condition. And like I said, I got to spend last week with him out in California, and it was absolutely amazing. So if he's watching this, I don't know if he watches these or not, but I love you, brother. It was so great to see you. And again, for me, and only speaking for me, the friendship that he and I have had has been through a lot of rough seas. And honestly, to be honest with you, most of it is probably my fault. I, in the past, have tended to be very hyper-dramatic. I can be very short. I can be very abrupt. Even to this day, sometimes I struggle with that. But I think part of me also, and again, this is sort of a disjointed thing, but I think for me, one thing I had to let go of, and I didn't really realize this until maybe a couple years ago, but going all the way back to high school, when he and our friendship kind of like ended abruptly, I don't think I realized until I was open to really looking at it how deeply that hurt me and how sort of distrustful that left me in terms of our friendship and the way I felt about our friendship. And I think it wasn't really until I came to terms with that that I was open to really rebuilding the friendship and having it sit completely restored in the garage the way it does today. Because right now, like I said, I think our friendship is as strong as it's ever been. I fucking love that guy. I would do anything for him. Literally, and I say this literally, I would literally die for that guy. So I love you, brother, if you're watching this. I had a great time with you over the last couple weeks. Sorry for the therapy session. Those of you watching this who have no idea what I'm talking about, have no interest in what I'm talking about. But I love you, man. It was great to see you. And he is the only one that will get this reference, but I got a tape coming for you soon, man. So be on the lookout for that. That's something you wouldn't understand anyway. All right, man, let's get into this record. Let's get into the band. My relationship with U2 began probably around the same time that my friend Tim's relationship with U2 began, which was probably around 1990 or 1991. Now, growing up in the 80s, you could not escape this band. This band were everywhere, especially basically any time after kind of like the War album came out. And man, especially after 1987 when the Joshua Tree came out. And the Rattle and Hum era of that band when they were just the biggest thing in the entire world. You couldn't escape it if you were a fan. If you weren't a fan, you could not escape this band growing up in the 80s. My friend Tim became a fan of this band. Following that era, I believe it was when he heard the song Mysterious Ways off of their album Actung Baby. And basically for him, that was a life-changing moment. And he has been an obsessed fanboy ever since. Now, he and I may not always agree on the bands that we're obsessed with. But he and I have always sort of had this same kind of like obsessive, compulsive relationship with music. And in high school, like I said, it was comic books and music. And he has been one of the world's biggest U2 fans pretty much ever since. For me, this was a band when we were in high school that I really kind of like rejected. At the time, I thought they were totally uncool. I was starting to get into other kinds of music. I think I've mentioned on these videos before, after the kind of alternative revolution, if you will, hit, I started listening to a lot of the kind of grunge bands. I got into bands like the Butthole Surfers, and Rollins Band, and Dead Milkmen, and bands like that. And to me, at the time, U2 were just like so uncool. So for a long time, I absolutely rejected this band. I kind of rejected his fandom of this band. I thought, it's just a phase, it'll pass. Eventually he'll start listening to the goods. And it just stuck to him. Like I said, he has been probably one of the world's biggest U2 fanatics for over 30 years. For me, this is a band that I am a casual fan of at this point in time. Right around the time of the COVID pandemic, I did a project for my friend Tim where I went back and I listened to every one of the U2 studio albums and I ranked them. That was something I had never really done. Of course, I've heard songs over the years. Like I said, growing up in the 80s and 90s, this is a band you could never escape, whether you liked them or not. But I hadn't heard all of the albums. I hadn't heard all of the deep stuff. I'd heard mostly stuff that was popular, stuff that was on MTV, stuff I heard listening, driving around in his car. And it wasn't really until I went back and I listened to the entire catalog in chronological order and really started doing research and reading about the albums and watching documentaries about the band and all these things that I actually started to develop my own kind of appreciation for U2. Again, I would never say that I'm the world's biggest fan. I'm a casual fan. There's stuff all the way through their catalog that I like, and there's a lot of stuff through their catalog I don't like. I would definitely consider myself to be a casual fan, and again, it wasn't until semi-recently that I really kind of even developed that sort of relationship with the band. I've never seen them live. It is something that I would like to do at some point in time. Now, obviously, all these bands are getting older. Even the big guy, Morrissey, just turned 64. But I would still like to see U2. I mean, if the opportunity came up to see them, especially with my best friend Tim, who is the ultimate fan, that would be the greatest scenario possible. I don't know that I'd go see them on my own without him. I do know that the band is getting ready to start their Vegas residency on September 29th in Vegas for the 30th anniversary, loose 30th anniversary event for Achtung Baby. And the last time I checked, which was a couple weeks ago, the tickets for opening night. Now, I don't know if this is the actual, if this is official or if this is secondary market. I don't know, but opening day tickets, the cheapest tickets you could get for opening day were almost $600. So I think I will take a hard pass on that. But again, U2 is a band that I've been following relatively closely due to the friendship I have with my best friend Tim, who's been a fan really since Achtung Baby. Now, the band formed in 1976 in Dublin, Ireland. In March of 1980, the band signed to Island Records, famously in the women's pooper at a club called the Lyceum in Dublin, Ireland. Now, U2 detractors may suggest that there's no better place for this band to sign their record contract than in the women's toilet because they're shit. But I don't necessarily agree with that. In fact, I don't agree with that at all, as a matter of fact. The band's first single with Island Records came out in May of 1980. The song was called 11 O'Clock Tick Tock. And the first record that put the band on the road to becoming the biggest and one of the most divisive, bands of the 1980s. Boy, this record came out on October 20th of 1980. This album is produced by Steve Lillywhite, who is one of my favorite producers of all time. Now, he's worked with Morrissey a lot. And actually, he's responsible for producing some of my favorite and actually my least favorite Morrissey record. But he's a guy that I absolutely love. I really love this record a lot. This is my favorite album by the band, and it's not just because the first stuff, only their first stuff is great, and after that's garbage. Because I like stuff all the way through their catalog. I do like stuff. I do dislike stuff a lot through their catalog, but to me, this is their greatest album. I absolutely love this album. For me, my favorite era of music is that kind of window between 1974 and 1977 and 1984. And this record, I think, fits right in there. Again, produced by Steve Lillywhite. I love the production on this record. I really love the effect on Bono's voice. I love the guitar. And I really love the rhythm section on this record. I love the fact that you can hear all three pieces of the instrumental band. And I really love the rhythm section. And I really love the drumming on this record. Now, there are some snobby drum fans out there who will suggest that Larry Mullen Jr., especially on this record, was a subpar drummer. I really disagree. I really love the drumming on this album. I love the drum sound on this album. And again, this was the band's first step towards becoming the biggest and arguably one of the most divisive bands of the 1980s. If you're a kid our age, you probably have an opinion about U2 one way or the other. This is not a band you hear many people go, they're okay. People tend to be like all in or all against this band. And again, I like this band. And it wasn't until a few years ago I sort of embraced my casual fandomness of it. But I really love this record. Now, this is the copy that I have. Of course, the album is famous for having the other cover, which has a young kid on the front. His kid's name was Peter Rowan, who was a friend, I believe, of Bono's growing up. Now, this is the American pressing, and the Island Records changed the original artwork for the American pressing because they were afraid that the American audience would think that the band was promoting pedophilia. So I don't really get what that is. I don't think that the original cover is sexual in any way, actually. Actually, I think the original cover is quite striking. I think it's one of the great album covers of its era. And I don't dislike this album cover. It's completely not as good as the original one. And according to what I've read, the band absolutely just did not like this album cover at all. They did not want to embrace it in any way, but this was the album cover that the record company decided to use in America. And I have this record on CD also, and I have the same cover on CD. I don't know why. It wasn't a contrived decision. It's just the one that I happened to pick up when I found this record, both on vinyl and CD. One thing I love about the back cover is you have The Edge and Adam Clayton and Bono, and Larry, the drummer, just goes by one name. Like, I get it with The Edge and Bono, but why is Larry just Larry? I mean, Adam Clayton is the only guy who decided to go full name. Maybe Larry's ego was a little bit more developed back then. But anyway, I really love this album a lot. Again, I think this is the greatest album in their catalog, and I think that this is really one of the better post-punk albums of all time. Really, there's not much bad on this album at all. Again, I just really like this record a lot. But it starts with the song I Will Follow. That's one of the most recognizable U2 songs still to this day. A great album starter. Of course, that guitar starts up. I love the drum roll in. A really beautiful song. This song is I've read that this song is both a testimonial to Bono's faith, as well as commenting on the death of his mother. Bono's mother died when he was only 14 years old, something I can't even possibly imagine. But as you know, and obviously this would it had a big impact on his work, especially his early work. The song "I Will Follow." mentions that. The next song, Twilight, is also about his mother. I really love that song. Again, just post-punk, crispy, snappy, clean, up-tempo. I love the rhythm section. I love the drumming. Again, a great song. Another song about the passing away of his mother. And actually, it wasn't until I started doing more research into the band and started listening to more of their records that I even realized that Bono's mother died when he was such a young kid. It's very sad, and it had a big impact on his early work. Probably his entire life. I mean, I can't imagine it not. The next two songs, ANCAT Dub and Into the Heart, I like. Both of these songs are slower. They just kind of like melt together. I really like the instrumentation on ANCAT Dub. It's slow, it's dark, it's moody. I don't know that you would ever say that U2 are spooky, but it kind of is a little bit spooky. And Into the Heart, it just kind of melts into the Heart. Slow, sort of melancholic. A song I really like a lot. I like Into the Heart better than ANCAT Dub. I think ANCAT Dub, there's not a bad song on this record. There's not really a bad song on this album, but I would say if I had to pick a least favorite, it would probably be ANCAT Dub. Side 1 ends with the song Out of Control, a song basically that Bono wrote about his 18th birthday and how his life was out of control, and how, in the song about death, how you basically, I think it's about when you die, it's out of control, you don't know what's going to happen. But supposedly this song was written about his 18th birthday. Very heavy song. I really love this song a lot. Back to being more up-tempo. Especially after ANCAT Dub and Into the Heart. It's a nice change of pace. And I really love the... I tend to gravitate more towards the up-tempo songs on this record. Just because I love how snappy and crispy and swaggery the band was. And I will say that for this record, the band may have lacked some experience. Obviously, they were very young kids when this record was written and recorded, but they did not lack confidence. They did not lack swagger. This is a much more confident, self-assured record than I think October, which came out after this. The band had also gone through a lot more sort of struggles in between the making of Boy and October. So this record to me is very, not cocky, well, maybe cocky in a good way. But the side 2 starts off with probably my favorite song on the entire record, which is Story for Boys. I absolutely love that song. I think that is a perfect punk rock, post-punk anthem. I love the instrumentation. I love his voice. I love the lyrics. I think Story for Boys is definitely my favorite song off this record, which is saying a lot because I think there's a lot of really good stuff on Boy, to be honest with you. The next song is The Ocean. Again, we're going to go down-tempo with this one. This is a relatively short song. I would say it's not bad. I don't quite understand what he's saying in this song. But again, I don't think it's a bad song. I don't think there's a bad song on this entire record. But when you go from Stories for Boys to that, it drops off a little bit, in my opinion. The next song is A Day Without Me. I absolutely love that song. It is, again, up-tempo. I love the instrumentation. I love the voice, and I love the rhythm section. I really love the rhythm section on this record. Again, I've heard some people say that Larry Mullen couldn't play drums back then. I really disagree. I love the rhythm section. I know that during the production of this record, too, Steve Lillywhite really sort of experimented with different drum effects, and I think he really got the best out of Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr. I think that they shine more on this than they do on any of the stuff that Brian Eno ever did, honestly. The next song is Another Time, Another Place. Again, I really love that song. Again, up-tempo, post-punk, snappy, in-your-face, cocky. I like it. I like that song a lot. The next song is probably my second favorite song on the entire record, which is The Electric Co. I absolutely love this song. I love the intro. I love the instrumentation. I love the vocals. Absolutely great song. Probably my second favorite song on the record. I actually really like the whole second side of this album a lot. Even the song The Ocean, which I may have seemed like I was being critical on. I actually like side 2 of this record a lot more than side 1. Just because I feel like on side 1, NCAT Dub and Into the Heart, it kind of slows it down a little bit too much for me. And the album ends with a song called Shadows and Tall Trees, sort of a slower song. Very beautiful song. I don't know that this is necessarily the best song, in my opinion, to end the record on, but it's a good song. I don't have anything against it. I don't know that it's necessarily a standout track to me, but it isn't bad. I would definitely take it over NCAT Dub and The Ocean. A little bit of a slower song, but again, that's a little look back at Boy from 1980 by the band that would become the biggest band of my generation, inarguably, U2, for a band that my best friend Tim from high school has been rocking out to for over 30 years. And is there anything worse than the term rocking out? Can't believe I just said that. Anyway, man, thanks so much for checking out this video. My name is Jamie. This is Archaic Records. I am coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Listen to U2, especially Boy, October, Zooropa, and Pop, especially, and War. Go out and support your local record store. And be sure to check back on this channel every week for Morrissey Monday, my weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. I want to thank you so much for checking out this video. I really do appreciate it. Feel free to leave comments below, and I will talk to you next time.